Now, today we're going to look at creating a self-hosted runtime. Now, this is used with Data Factory. So first off, we're going to go ahead and create a brand new Azure resource because we're going to use this resource pool to create our Data Factory. So once that's created, which is pretty straightforward and very fast as you can see from a command line, we're just going to do a get AZ resource group and just check that it exists, although we did just have the output above telling us it was successfully created, but always good to check. Now what we're going to do is create a data factory, so that we use the set az data factory v2 command. We tell it the name of our data factory and a resource group, so those are the two variables that we entered earlier, and the location, aka the Azure instance we want to run it on. Now, while that's busy being created, I should probably explain that self-hosted runtimes are primarily used for shipping data from an on-premise environment or another cloud environment to Azure Data Factory. So what we're intending to do here today is effectively connect Azure Data Factory to our, let's say, on-premise data. So now we're going to go ahead and create the integrated self-hosted runtimes on our data factory. So this is using an Azure Data Factory v2 integrated runtime command, and we use the type as self-hosted. So you can have more than one type of integrated runtime, but they have different purposes. So what we can see here is it would help if I didn't have a typo in my variable when I'm trying to get the key. So when you're installing the agent that will run this eventually, there is a requirement to provide a key. Now you can get the key in a couple of different ways. One, you could get the key here using the command line. So you can see we have two keys returned, and if I format this with the FL, you'll see that we have two keys, much easier to read. And those keys are then used to authenticate the self-hosted runtime. So if you were doing this fully from command line, you might say something like, okay, get me the first key. So we're going to do the auth key 1, and then it just returns the one key. And then you would feed that potentially to your installation environment. So what we're going to do is now go get that exact same key, which fortunately enough will also include a convenient download link for the integrated runtimes. So first of all, it helps if I refresh my page, so it's got at least current data in it. So here we go. There's our resource group, there's our data factory, and this is the part where we can see there's no activity on our data factory because we did just set it up, which is all good. We go to the authoring section. This opens up a completely new page, which we're going to look at a couple of things here. One of which is we're going to go to the left hand side here, we're going to go to manage, and we're going to see that we've got linked services and there's nothing here yet. And we have integrated runtimes. Now we are going to add a link service a little later because we're going to be doing our data connection. But before we do our data connection, we really should have something to be able to pull the data in. Now you can see there's a couple of default ones. So we've got here our newly created one at the bottom, and current status is unavailable. So we don't have the agent installed on our on-prem machine. So let's go ahead and fix that. And as you can see, when we click on it, there the keys are available there. So we're going to go to the download link, which is also there, and we can go ahead and download. So we're going to skip over to our Windows machine that's ready to start the installation. Now on our Windows machine, we just fire up the URL, download the appropriate file, and basically run the installation as you would normally. So there's nothing super special here. Usually when you're doing the download, there is multiple versions that are available. I'm going to choose the latest one, which in this case happens to be the top one. It's couple of builds later, no big changes there. And through the miracle of video editing, we're going to super speed up the install so that we don't need to wait for this to finish as long as we would normally wait. I mean, it's not a terribly long install, but it's something like 3-4 minutes, and frankly, on a 10-minute video, that can kind of really eat up a good third of the video. So anyway, once this finishes, it's going to prompt you immediately for the key that we would normally have. And I could just enter the key and say, okay, that's it, done. But I want to show you something else. So there are several ways to enter the key. One is to simply enter it into the prompted dialog box. Another one is to navigate through the file system down to the shared directory for the integrated runtimes. And within that, there is a command line binary or command line configuration that you can use, which is the DMG CMD. And we can basically use this to configure. So what I'm going to do is just hold down Control and open a command prompt here, in this case PowerShell. And I'm going to show you the various options that are available. So you can register and unregister a agent effectively from command line. So this is particularly useful if you've got something like Chocolatey or other package management tools where you want to be able to do an installation. So you can see here, if we run the executable with the dash key and then provide the key, that would have the same effect as if we were to just put it into the GUI. So let's do that. Let's put the key directly into the GUI here and just finish off the configuration to show you that it's working and get the rest of our demo off the ground. So it takes a moment or two to connect. It will tell you that it's connected, it'll tell you it's successful, and there's this little dialog box at the bottom there which I really want to pay attention to. If you are going to run multiple runtimes, you need this box enabled. What this does is it opens up the firewall so that the different runtimes can communicate. This allows a high availability option. So in the event that one of them is down, the others will continue to work, and it basically allows them to communicate on a special port for the election process and job handling, which is not possible if you don't enable that. Anyway, we'll go ahead and just register our standalone here because we've only got one agent for our purposes of demo, so we don't have a high availability solution. But obviously that's something you would sort out if that was a business requirement. So this bit does take a little while. Generally speaking, the configuration is relatively straightforward and fast, and you do get a nice little notification at the end with a green box telling you that it was able to connect to your Azure instance and successfully move forward. Also, depending on whether you've got a proxy, you may get an auto detect or prompted to configure the proxy if it's not. You can also see here that it's already telling me that my version is out of date. There may be a later version available, and that's fine. That will be auto installed at the end of the day. In the meantime, let's go back to the portal for a second and see what we've got. So if I do a quick refresh now, I can just close that, hit refresh. We should see a change in status. So now we can see, yes, our integrated runtime is in fact connected. We do have a successful running status. All is good. So the agent is now connected to our data factory, but we don't have any data. So before we start building pipelines, and that's something that I'm not going to cover here today, we need to at least get some data. So where are we going to get the data from? So we need to go down to this thing called datasets. But before that, we need to also configure a linked service. So now that we have the agent installed, we need the agent to do something. So we're going to say we would like the agent to connect to a SQL Server. So this is basically the connection details that you're going to provide to that SQL Server. So we need the name of the server and the instance, the name of the database, and the SQL or Windows login that you intend to use for authentication. So I'm just going to go ahead and use the SQL login for the moment because it is a demo. And you don't need to store these passwords and things directly into this format. You could have them in an Azure Key Vault and just reference the Key Vault. But again, that's a little bit out of scope of what we're doing right now, so we'll come back to that at maybe a later stage if someone wants to discuss Key Vaults. So we're going to enter the instance, and you should see, and it's just a little bit marginal for my recording, we have a test connection. Now, the test connection here is going to fail, and for 90% of you it should fail because we haven't made one very subtle and rather important change, and hopefully we're going to spot what that is in a moment. So where we have the problem here is the connection information has been entered, and it has been entered correctly, and our test connection is failing. Why might that be? Well, the answer is actually pretty straightforward. If we look up to the top here, one of the things it's asking is which integrated runtime are you trying to run with? So since I didn't specify the integrated runtime, it's trying to run with the integrated runtime that's sitting in the Azure cloud. Now, there's obviously a minor little issue there that the Azure cloud cannot find the machine where my database is running because it's sitting behind a firewall outside of the Azure data center. So the simple one here is to just simply go to the top. In the drop down, select the integrated runtime that we created earlier, and then when we do the test connection from that one, it will be able to connect. So we'll just wait for this last attempt to time out, and again you'll just get a generic error, nothing particularly useful, no real way of saying that hell I can't resolve the host. It just tells you I'm unable to connect. So if we change the drop down to our created runtime from earlier, we now see that we can fix up any details that we may have troubleshooted before, do the test connection, and much quicker we should get a response. There we go. So we have a successful test. Now that that's created, we have the agent, we have the connection to the data. So we've got 2 steps done. So we should now, in theory, he says, be able to see in our authoring mode, when we go to datasets, we should be able to create some data, or in this case, retrieve the data from that remote machine. So if we go to data and we create a new dataset, and it's going to ask us, well, what type of data are we going for? So again, we're going to say it's a SQL Server. So we can select from this, and once we select, it's going to give us a drop-down list. So we have here our connection that we just specified, and then it's going remotely and retrieving a list of tables, so we don't need to manually type them in, we can just select. So that's also kind of proved that the connection already works, because that's been pre-populated, so it's already got a connection to the remote machine. So this is where we could then go on and say, okay, we want this table, we want to do this, but that's again kind of out of the scope here, as the demonstration of this video is simply to set up the self-hosted runtimes and the connections. If you want to know more about pipelines and things, that would be a different video, and maybe one for next time.